in general, and in a very blank sense. So people misinterpret Eisenhower, who said, I don't care what religion you are, as long as you're religious, right? But the point is that in America, there's a sense that religion helps to make you a better person, in part because we have this kind of tradition of smaller government, and we don't have an ethnic identity. We don't have a history, right? Most of us don't really remember back more than 40 or 50 years. So religion creates our community. So a lot of Americans will say, I want the president to be a Christian, right? So for Muslims, as long as you can convince people that Islam is like a good religion, it's an easy entryway into American society where you don't have ethnic boundaries. In Europe, it's the opposite, because many Europeans have the attitude that religion is a legacy of the past that is best left in the past. And that's how their civilization is developed, so I'm not hating on them, but the fact is that if you were a religious and ethnic minority, that makes your life really hard. Because not only do you have to get over the fact that you were visibly different, it's assumed that you were intellectually backwards. So you're facing kind of like a double whammy, right? The second problem is that it's really hard to assimilate to an ethnicity. How do you become a German? I mean, like, really? Like, how do you become French? That's a really hard thing to do, because Frenchness is loaded with centuries of history, tradition, ethnicity, cultural, and religious identity. It's not like Americanness, which is like kind of wide open. Like, we expand the boundary of America like every 5 years, right? Our president's middle name is Hussein. I'm just like, process that for a second, right? Like, that's pretty crazy if you think about that. I mean, seriously, like, the president's middle name is Hussein, right? For those of you who study Arabic, like 3-letter roots for every word, Baraka, Hasana, right? Our president's first 2 names have the same root as Hosni Mubarak. Right? Like, that's how interconnected the world has become. That's crazy, right? Like, Hasana, Hosni, Hasana, Hussein, Baraka, Mubarak, Baraka, Barak. It's crazy, right? That's how Arabic works, and the president's Muslim. Like, oh my God, Hosni Mubarak is Muslim. Some people are whispering to each other. Hosni Mubarak doesn't like Barack Obama very much right now. You sold me out. But that said, I think it's really difficult for European Muslims because it's hard to figure out how to fit. It's really hard. And then from within the European Muslim community, there's a couple points. The first is, and this is going to be controversial, there's too many of them. And I don't mean that in a pejorative or racist sense. American Muslims tend to exist in numbers where you have no choice but to work with the society around you. You can't ghettoize yourself, because America is a massive country with 300 million plus people and you're a few million. You have to engage wider society. European Muslims live in ghettos where they are pushed into on the one hand, but many of them are also content to stay in those ghettos. And that's a problem. The second problem is that many European Muslims don't have problems because they're Muslim, they have ethnic problems. So the challenge of being a Pakistani in Britain is actually the issue. It's not the challenge of being a Muslim in Britain, if you know what I'm saying. And that's a huge problem. And I think finally the socioeconomic thing is a big problem. Like, if you look at Australia's Muslims, many of them came to work in Australia's factories in the 60s and 70s, and then all the factories closed. So before they even got their foot in the door and like figured out what they were supposed to do and how to kind of build something, they lost their jobs. So if you're a European Muslim like father or mother, you're still living a better life than you were back in Algeria or Turkey. Well, maybe not Turkey right now, but you know what I'm saying, right? But your kids are living a horrible life because they've had no other experience, and all they know is like the ceiling above their head that they can't get past. So you know what I'm saying? So it breeds a lot of frustration and a lot of anxiety. And unfortunately, the European system contributes to this. In many European societies, the mosques are subsidized by the state. Right? Like, that sounds kind of counterintuitive, right? So the Dutch government gives, just imagine this if you're active in Muslim communities in the US. Like, many mosques in the Netherlands receive about 500,000 euros a year for their budget. That's a lot of money for like a mosque, right? Like, based on what we're used to getting in terms of money. And yet, that kind of encourages you to be complacent. Because if someone's giving you money, so you'll find this phenomenon, there's a Moroccan mosque and there's a Turkish mosque. And they're on this, Khalid Latif, he was here yesterday, right? He told me when he went to the Netherlands, there was a Moroccan mosque and there was a Turkish mosque on the same street. And he was like, why do you have 2 mosques? That's stupid. Like, you're just building 2 buildings unnecessarily. It's waste resources. And they said, well, the government provides the money, so who cares? And then he said, where do the Dutch Muslims go? And they were like, right? But that's what I mean, like, it creates complacency. So there are a lot of challenges. I don't know. Every time I talk to European Muslims, I'm like, thank God I'm an American. I don't mean that like in a dismissive sense. Like, they have it really bad. And we had a State Department group and a bunch of German Muslims came all excitedly up to me and they're like, you have Chinese New Year's in Chinatown? They would never do that in Germany. And I was like, oh my God, right? I mean, that's the challenge, right? Like, it's not Islam itself, it's multiculturalism in general that is a challenge, and that makes it really difficult. That was a question.